text messages sent to and from Trayvon Martin's phone. And some of them are from his mom and dad, the kinds of messages you'd expect between parents and their 17-year-old son. Other messages are exchanges with friends, and some of these messages paint Trayvon Martin as someone who was into marijuana and talked about guns and had recent fights. I want to read you a few of these messages that were released by Zimmerman's defense team. One of them was from November of 2011. It says, these are Trayvon texts, says, I lost the first round, but I won the second and third, alluding to fighting. The person on the other end says, well, at least you won, but you need to stop fighting, babe, for real. Another one from February 2012, just days before he died. Trayvon says, the way I fight and dug golds I had last year. The friend says, you be fighting, yeah, a lot. But it wasn't just the fights. You see, the texts also appear to show that Trayvon smoked marijuana, and here's a text exchange from December of 2011. Oh, you smoke? Yeah, you do. Yeah, do you? Then Trayvon says, because an addiction to alcohol is more harsh than an addiction to weed. And then there's this one sent on February 21st, 2012. This is just 3 days before he died. Trayvon says, I got weed and I get money Friday. Now, I want to be clear about what we just talked about there. This is still early in the legal process. So this is not evidence in a trial. The trial has not started yet. But the question is, what are the meaning in these messages, and will they get into this trial? And if they do, what will happen? So we don't know what the necessary meaning is, but that's what we're going to dig into a little bit. There's a lot more where these came from. And, of course, the biggest question here is, why are these relevant? And as I said, will the jury see them? So joining me, the attorney for Trayvon's parents, Ben Crump. Ben, always good to talk to you. And, you know, you got these texts going back and forth. And the first question I have for you is, does any of this seem relevant to the trial itself?
Not at all, Ryan. It's completely irrelevant. And what Attorney O'Mara and his team are doing is nothing new. It's an old strategy. You try to vilify the victim and justify the heinous act that your client did. And I don't believe the judge is going to allow any of this, because George Zimmerman did not know who Trayvon Martin was when he got out of his car, chased him, and shot him in the heart.
So you feel like this is a setup to show Trayvon Martin is a bad kid, and somehow that influenced his behavior the night he encountered George Zimmerman?
This is a desperate attempt to try to influence the jury pool, and it is not going to be relevant. It's not going to be admitted. The only photographs that are relevant are the photographs of Trayvon Martin on the night he was shot and killed.
Okay. Now, talk to me about Trayvon Martin's parents. Have you spoken to them about this, and how did they react to it?
Well, I talked to them about this previously. This is nothing new. You know, obviously, they knew about a trace of marijuana in his system, and the jury will have to decide that, because I think it's irrelevant. Everybody knows the effect that marijuana has on a person. But what's more relevant is the fact that the Sanford Police Department did not take a blood and alcohol analysis of George Zimmerman the night he shot an unarmed kid. And by his own admission to Detective Sereno, he was on prescription medications, and it did affect his mind, because he said he couldn't remember the street signs, and that's a reason why he could have had to get out of his car. Now, we don't buy that. We all heard those tapes ourselves, and when you listen objectively, you know George Zimmerman got out that car to chase Trayvon Martin, and that's going to be very relevant. These voice analysis, you know, there's things that are relevant that's objective, not this innuendo and these suggestions that every teenager who ever smoked marijuana should be sentenced to death. I think if that happened, then God save all our children.
And talk to us, you know, because these messages, people are going to read them, they're going to see them, they're going to make judgments about Trayvon Martin. They're going to draw conclusions. You tell us, what kind of kid was Trayvon Martin really?
He was a regular teenager. You know, teenagers try best they can to fit in. They try to impress their friends by talking tough and different things like that. When you go look at your children's text messages, if you can get the locks off of the codes, you'll be surprised. But none of that is relevant, and none of those kids deserve the death penalty. And it's just a shame that they would try to use this to justify killing an unarmed kid. These stereotypes and this mindset is the same reason why George Zimmerman got out that car and chased and profiled and shot Trayvon Martin in the heart on February February 26, 2012.
Okay, I have to ask you, you mentioned the jury pool in all of this and the fact that this information is coming out. Do you think this might have the impact of turning people to a position of looking at Trayvon Martin and making judgments about him before this case starts? Because this information is coming out and a lot of people have access to it.
Well, you know, you asked about Trayvon's parents. His mother and father have faith, as I do, in the American justice system, and we have faith in the jury that they're going to follow the evidence. And based on the evidence, Ryan, there is so much overwhelming evidence that will have George Zimmerman held accountable for killing Trayvon Martin. There's evidence that is so objective. The voice analysis, when you hear the things that George Zimmerman said even before he got out of his car to pursue Trayvon Martin, when you hear the many inconsistent statements that he made that are physically impossible to have happened the way he said it happened. It is that evidence that, as long as the jury follows it, George Zimmerman will be convicted of killing Trayvon Martin.
All right, Ben Crump, thank you for talking to us. And, you know, we'll be talking to you as this trial progresses, so appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, and folks, again, the big question here. Why did George Zimmerman's lawyer release these text messages for us to read? I'm going to ask him next. Just hours ago, we got new information in the case against George Zimmerman. His defense team released text messages from Trayvon Martin's phone just days before he died, and we talked to the attorney for Trayvon Martin's parents. He says the texts are irrelevant. Now we have George Zimmerman's attorney, Mark O'Mara, with us. And, Mark, good to have you with us. Mark, first, talk to us.
Hey, Ryan, how are you?
Good to see you, Mark. Now, how are these text messages relevant if, as Ben Crump says, what matters is what happened the night Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman had their altercation?
Well, of course, today is not a determination of relevancy. The first level is whether or not it's discoverable, and it certainly is discoverable. We found this information on Trayvon Martin's phone. Actually, the state had the same information we found out. So the question of relevance is something that's determined at trial. Right now, it is discoverable, and if we ever intend to use it at trial, we may or may not, we have to disclose it to the state, and that's what was done today.
Okay, but a lot of people out there are going to say, well, it's talk of Trayvon Martin talking about using drugs and fighting and things like that, and it may play into stereotypes. How do you respond to that? The idea that, especially the prosecutors saying that maybe there's bias involved here, how do you respond to that concept that maybe this is playing into stereotypes and, in a sense, trying to turn a potential jury pool against the victim?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, obviously the Martin family wasn't unaware that this was their son. I mean, this was information that was readily available to them, and of course they were with them. So it's not really new to the Martin family. As far as stereotyping, this is information as to who Trayvon Martin was by his own words, by his own pictures, and his own deeds. Whether or not that comes into a trial is really going to be determined by the state. If the state tries this case the way they should, which is focusing on what happened those 5 minutes, we have the non-emergency call, it goes off air, then we have the 911 call. So we know most of what happened. If they keep their evidence focused on that, then who Trayvon Martin was before may not be relevant. However, if they try to bring in evidence as to who Trayvon Martin was as the Martin family has presented him, then this evidence is going to be completely relevant. But, you know, the state's in charge of how they try their case. I'm just in charge of getting ready to respond to their case.
Okay. And, you know, the other part of this, Mark, is people are going to say, well, you're trying to attack the victim. Now, this is, in a sense, a self-defense case. Do you, in some ways, need to do that in your case in order to prove George Zimmerman's point?
I think I need to be ready to show a three-dimensional overview of who Trayvon Martin was if the state begins it. My case actually is quite simple. I'm going to look at what happened and the forensic evidence to support my client's self-defense claim, and that is very straightforward. He was broken, was smashed in his nose, knocked to the ground, and pummeled by Trayvon Martin. That is not just what I want to have happen and show to the jury. That is what the independent eyewitness said he saw. So we can argue back and forth about why George got out of the car or why he did what he did, but what is undeniable evidenced by the very first state attorney's office investigator who said this, there's absolutely no evidence to support that George was not heading back to his car when Trayvon Martin attacked him. So if that is the forensic evidence that's undeniable, that is self-defense. I really believed that we would easily find out whose voice that was on the 911 tape. I was quite surprised that it wasn't able to be identified concretely. But if it was George's screams for help, as was suggested by the eyewitness, then he waited 40 seconds of pummeling before he did what he had to do to protect his life, which was to shoot Trayvon Martin.
All right. Now, Mark, the other question is why release this information on a website pre-trial? Because the thing there is people should say, well, you know, are you trying to influence the jury here, trying to maybe somehow show them some things about this case before you get that jury? Why release it pre-trial?
Let's not forget the history. The state began the process of releasing discovery on their website. And actually, I don't blame them for that. It makes a lot of sense. It's an easy way to get that information out to the public or out to the media in what we have, which is an open discovery state. So the state did that, and we did it in response. We filed our motions that showed up on our website. We filed discovery that showed up on our website. So this is not new. This is just in line with what the state did or started doing and what we do. The timing is we found out about this information only after the state provided us with what's called the bin file. Seems as though they had that information months ago, but we just got it recently, looked into it, found this information, and if we ever intend to use it, of course, we have to forward it to the state, and under our discovery rules and public records law, that makes it public.
All right, Mark O'Mara, appreciate your time. We'll be talking to you as well throughout the trial. Appreciate it, Mark.
Sounds good. Good talking to you again.
All right. Now, folks,